The entire real estate industry is changing, and if you don't know how to adapt, you're going to be left in the dust. So if you are a real estate agent, a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, and you're figuring out what should I do, or are you freaking out about what's going on, you should be, unless you follow these key tips. So you may have heard that just this week there was some updates in the NAR litigation on commission structures and compensation and transparency. And NAR even sent out an email yesterday, I want to read this, saying you should consider following these business practices, using buyer-broker agreements, explaining to your clients how you get paid, and highlighting the value that you bring to your clients' transactions. Well, news for you, you should have been doing all three of these things since day one. And if you haven't, then you haven't been actually following your own duties to yourself, to your business, and to your clients. So I always like to imagine if your client was standing right here and you're deciding how you want to run your business. If you weren't proud of what you were saying out loud to how to run your business in front of that client, it's not right for you and it's not right for the client. So let's talk about how does this benefit both you as the agent and the client. Because if it doesn't benefit you, it doesn't benefit the client, because you need to run your life too. Can we agree on that? And dear consumer, if you're watching this video, your agent needs to pay their bills and to actually be able to invest in themselves, to invest in you. So why should you do a buyer-broker agreement as an agent? Well, this talks about a lot of really important things. One, it talks about what you do as a fiduciary responsibility to your client. That means you're not just filling out forms and providing a functionary role. You are a licensed, educated, comprehensive individual that will help a buyer and a client get the best service, get the best results, get the best advice. And so if somebody wants to hire a functionary, just someone who can fill out the paperwork, that's great. That's for somebody else. Maybe that's for a discount agent or a discount broker. If that's not you, then keep listening. But if somebody wants to hire you because of what you can offer better or more than somebody else, then this is for you. So fiduciary responsibility to yourself and to the client. 2, compensation. A lot of this is talking about compensation, so let's just not wait for this for later. We've always talked about, a lot of agents will say, oh, the service is free, or a buyer agent is free, or a buyer doesn't have to pay a buyer's agent for this. Well, guess what? This is saying you should be transparent about how you're paid. We should have been doing this since day one. So the money, let's think about this for a second, everybody. There's typically 4 people in a transaction. And in fact, 98%, according to some recent stats, 98% of transactions have both a buyer's agent and a seller's agent. So we have the 4 people. We have a buyer, a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, and a seller. Well, typically in the previous structure, it was the seller hires a listing agent to exclusively advertise, market, and sell their property. And they're going to say, hey, dear agent, I'll pay you a percentage of the purchase price. And often that agent was saying, dear other buyer brokers, bring me your client, bring me the buyer, and I'll split the compensation with you. But guess what? That structure makes it sound like the money's coming from the seller. The money's coming and has always come from the buyer in the first place. The buyer buys the property and gives all that money to the seller. The seller then gives some compensation to the listing agent. The listing agent just gives compensation to the buyer's agent, but that money was coming from the buyer in the first place. Why are we not talking to buyers about this in the first place? So when talking to a buyer, it's important they understand how you get paid and why. And this is not about set dollar amount or a standard fee. This is about you understanding your value of why a buyer should hire you and why you are earned your compensation for the fiduciary responsibility you are performing for that buyer. So the money always has come from the buyer in the first place. Let's let them know about that. It is our service. It is a duty to the buyer, and a buyer-broker agreement requires a buyer and a buyer's agent to talk about these things. Number 2 reason why this is important to talk about this. Well, what else? It talks about your designated agent. A buyer broker is actually a relationship with the office, the broker. And it's saying there's a designated agent who is going to be your fiduciary, who's going to be representing you and your best interests. It's important to talk about that. Well, what else does the buyer-broker agreement go over? It talks about things like fair housing and dual agency. These are really strict rules and requirements in which a licensed individual needs to operate to follow license law and ethics. If you were, let's say you were get sued for $500,000. If you're going to buy a $500,000 place, imagine you're getting sued for $500,000. Would you want to work with an attorney who's representing you that doesn't follow the law, doesn't follow ethics, and just shows up to court? Or would you be hiring a high-end individual who is licensed, who follows the rules, who follows the law, and is there to represent you in your best interest? That's exactly what a buyer-broker agreement does. So why aren't we talking to our buyers and our buyers' agents about this more often? What else does it do? Well, it talks about things like what our actual roles and responsibilities are going to be. What am I going to do for you? What am I requiring from you as the buyer? This is also really important when talking about engaging in a professional relationship. And let's think about it. As we're talking about compensation and value, you have attorneys, you have authors, artists, actors, doctors. The better somebody is, the more value they're going to command. And it's important that you understand your value as an agent and the client understands your value that you're going to bring to them when they're in their interview process. So let's talk about this, everybody. So I hope these tips have helped you realize, oh, hey, actually, I got a really important piece that I almost totally forgot about. How about Illinois license law requires us to disclose in writing Illinois agency? It doesn't mean that a buyer has to sign it, but it's required. So sometimes I'll have a buyer says, oh, I interviewed with another agent and they didn't bring this up. They're breaking Illinois license law. And Illinois, the NAR, National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, say we're required to talk about these things in the first place. So who do you want to hire? Someone who's following the law and following ethics, or someone who's not? So let's talk about this. Let's understand our value. And for whether you're a buyer's agent, or a seller, this is important to talk about transparency, talking about value, and talking about partnership and trust. I hope you all understand that this is important, and let's do this more. All right, so if you're an agent, whether you're new in the business or been in the business for a while, I recently had a conversation with, we'll call it one of the top agents in the industry, top 50, probably top 20. And we were talking, since I've been in the business since 2006, and since probably about 2007 and 2008, all of our buyers we've been working with buyer broker agreements. And she was blown away. For 15 years, she had never been working with buyer broker agreements either. So whether you're new or established, this is something that has been long coming, and don't beat yourself up if you haven't been practicing this, but let's practice this and start this now. So let's talk about all the ways this change actually benefits the entire industry, which means both agents and clients. Well, a couple notes here. Transparency of compensation. That's just the biggest one. That's what's driving this all. Money drives everything, right? So a lot of agents have often just said the service was free, or a buyer thought, oh, I don't need to pay this, and I can go on any website and click a button and see a property, and an agent will show me. La-di-da, magic. And that's never how it worked. The money always came from the buyer in the first place, and it went to the seller, who then shared it with the listing agent, and the listing agent shared it with the buyer's agent. So instead of assuming that it did 1 to 2 to 3, let's just talk to the buyer that option 1 is that first option, and option 2 is maybe you're compensating the agent directly. The money's always come from there in the first place. It's never been a free service. And talking about this transparency is really important for both the consumer and even the agent understanding how it's going to happen. There's also some more tips on how to advise a seller, so keep listening. License law and ethics. Illinois license law requires agency disclosures in writing, and the ethics rule, NAR ethics and Illinois ethics require that we are transparent and honest with clients, which includes talking about compensation. So if you're not having this conversation with every single buyer every single time, you are breaking Illinois license law, you're breaking your code of ethics, and you're breaking your fiduciary responsibility to the client. We're talking about, speaking of to the client, exclusivity. So the part that's not required is the exclusive piece. So what this means is This is not just talking about how we're paid and the value we offer. This is an agreement about trust, a partnership, a collaboration. We are not, as agents, we're not working for a buyer. We are working with a buyer. We have to be advising them on intimate life details and goals and finances, all of these things. This is a dual partnership, and it's important that a client is just as committed to me as I am back to them. And frankly, there's only a certain number of clients that we can be working with at any given time. If we're not having these agreements, then I have to just fill my car with as many people as possible, as often as possible, and just push for a sale and hope that whatever property client sees, I hope they buy it, because I have no guarantee of my compensation and no exclusivity from that client. I'm then a salesperson. I'm having to sell them a property. If they're completing this exclusive agreement, it says, Joel, agent, I trust you. We're going to work together. I may or may not buy a place, but if I do, it's with you and I choose you. That means I get to be an advisor and a consultant and not have to push a sale. Dear buyers, if you're listening to this and you're meeting an agent that you met online on one of the apps and they're just showing you a property, their only one job and expectation is to try and sell you that property or sell you something. They know nothing about you. They know nothing about your goals, and there's no dual partnership or trust at all. So exclusivity helps both the agent and the client. We're talking about, speaking of helping and what to do, fiduciary responsibility and defined services. This says, here's an agent, here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's what my roles and responsibilities are. Here's why my license is online to follow the Code of Ethics and Illinois license law. That's a really important piece, that if you don't have that in writing and agreed by all parties, then nobody has any set duties that they are required to perform. And I'm in the camp that every single business failure comes down to improper communication or unmet expectations. This is defining the expectations of service and of the quality of standards that we should be providing for the clients. Speaking of different ways to provide it, dual agency and fair housing. Well, we need to make sure a client understands who and how the way we're working, which agent is representing which client in a specific transaction. And there are options a buyer has on determining how an agent will work and will represent them depending on different scenarios. And with fair housing, we do not discriminate against any of the protected classes based off of national standards and your local state regulations. And that's a really important piece when you're hiring a realtor, not just a licensed agent. And so one of the things that I've been eager to talk about, we talked about how to talk about this conversation with sellers. If you're not just a buyer's agent, but you also represent sellers, serious question for you. Would you take a listing without a listing agreement? I don't even need to pause, because the answer is no. You would never take a listing without a listing agreement, because it says that seller is hiring you, how much they're going to compensate you, what you're supposed to do, by when, how long the agreement and relationship is going to last for. Well, why do we see buyers as any different? This is about a partnership and a collaboration, and they're hiring you, that buyer's hiring you to represent their best interests, and you're saying, I'm going to work for you on your best behalf. So we shouldn't be taking listings without listing agreements. Sellers wouldn't be expecting a listing agent to show up to pay for photos if they didn't sign a listing agreement. Well, buyers shouldn't be expecting us to be showing up in their car and spending 3 hours to show a couple properties if we're not having an exclusive relationship back as well. And so let's fast forward to, if you're an agent and meeting with a seller, maybe your first time meeting with a seller since after some of these industry changes. And what if that seller says, oh, hey, I heard that we don't have to pay a co-op to a buyer's agent anymore? Well, obviously there are no set standard percentages or listing fees, so it's important that you establish your value. But how about this? If you're advising the seller, there are some stats that say 98% of the transactions that occur are with a cooperating buyer's agent. And so imagine if there's a first-time buyer who's scrapping together a down payment, and they're having to be now paying out of pocket for the buyer's compensation directly to the buyer's agent. That's going to cost you possibly a lot of money, because maybe that buyer can't afford that down payment. Maybe they actually can't pay that out of pocket. And by incorporating that compensation into the purchase price, they're able to finance that. And so what if all of a sudden, by not offering that co-op compensation, that seller is not able to attract 98% of the buyers that they're going to attract? Or even further, most agents do 5 deals a year. Actually, most agents do 0, according to some of the stats, that only the top 10% of agents do 90%, and the top 20% do 80% of the production. So imagine if you as a seller are automatically not attracting most agents who, if you're that one of the 5 deals they're going to do for the year, and that agent doesn't know how to line up their compensation, are they going to see your property that's offering a co-op compensation to that agent? Or are they going to say, dear buyer, you don't want to do this one. I don't know my value. I'm not a great agent. I haven't had the buyer sign this agreement. I've only done 5 deals a year. I'm scrapping by to get by. I'm going to go show this other property. I'm going to go show your neighbor's place. I'm going to show the competition. So it's important that we're having these same transparent conversations with sellers as well, everybody. And so we talked about some agents only do a handful of deals, or this essentially is going to cause one of 2 things to happen. We're either going to buyers agents and agents are going to start offering better services and more transparency and getting these buyer broker agreements, or they're not. And guess what that means? There's going to be a lot of agents who won't know how to get paid, won't know how to make a living, and they're going to leave the industry. Frankly, no offense to anyone who can't establish the value of their own business, they're going to be leaving the industry, and that is only good for the industry. So either you show up and you understand the value and talk about transparency, or you're going to be out of the business. All right, so great. Let's say you now understand, wow, I should be doing this, and you understand the value of this for both yourself and the consumer. Well, now what? Well, whether you're a new agent doing this for the first time, or even an established agent who's never done this once in your life before, what do we do now? Well, one is make sure you check with your office to see if there's any training. I'm even talking with some newer coaching clients on how to incorporate this into their daily business, because that's an important part of their business in the first place. There's likely going to be a lot of trainings that are going to be involved either through NAR, through IAR, or through your local office. Maybe a lot of agents are now going to join teams that have a team leader who feels that this is an important part of the business. So find out whether it's your coach or your office or some kind of an accountability partner to figure out how to make this happen for you. This needs to start happening today, not tomorrow, but today, and find the people that can get you there. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification, do all the things you need to do. And this is a new series, so you gotta give me some love. I'm gonna give you love back. If you wanna keep these going, if you found that this can help your business and is also good for the consumer, then let's keep going and let's talk. Message me, subscribe, and we'll get more. Cheers.